This game is called Dead or School. There's about 90 assumptions you could make about its level of quality based on that title alone, and more of those assumptions would be hits than misses. But don't let that scare you away just yet. This partially crowdfunded, ecchi Metroidvania light run and gun was developed by Studio Nanafushi. It's seen its full release on Steam on June 3rd of 2019 after spending a period of time in early access. On March 13th of 2020, the game saw ports to the PS4 and Nintendo Switch. Today we're looking at the game on Switch, as the Switch's physical release in PAL territories was readily available for all my budget importing needs. Now, if one of the assumptions you made about this game is that there's no way it could possibly take itself seriously, well, that would be one of your hits. Dead or School is a pretty goofy game, and if you take it with the lack of seriousness that it engenders, you can certainly have some fun with it. This lack of seriousness, of course, makes itself most obvious in the game's story. The story here is made up of an endless amount of generic tropes, and I'm sure it's very well aware of it. Nearly 80 years prior to the events of the game, a war had broken out on the surface of the Earth. Man versus mutant. As it would appear, man lost the war, and in an attempt to save their species, they aggressed to build a new life underground, not unlike the situation seen between the humans and the Sentinels in the Matrix. Shortly after arriving underground, their collective memories of their time on Earth disappeared, as if systematically erased. Total, widespread amnesia. What does it mean? Anyway, Hisako one day is told a story by her grandmother about the schools that used to exist on the surface of the Earth. Her grandmother only remembers the schools because she was wearing her school uniform when mankind went underground. School, as it's told to Hisako, is like a fairy tale place, where people go to learn and make friends and enjoy time outside beneath the bright blue sky. And so, in Hisako, a desire stirs. To go to the surface, a lone girl with her grandmother's school uniform, some rudimentary weapons, like machine guns and rocket launchers, and win single-handedly the war that all united humanity lost against the mutants. She'll reclaim the Earth and form a school on the surface where her sincere and sweet dreams could become reality. Despite treading familiar anime AF territory, as the kids would say, this isn't a genre we typically see this kind of story in. So in effect, it still feels like it brings something new to the table, if not in the world of storytelling, at least in the world of Metroidvanias. Much like how the story is just a collection of done-before tropes, so too are the characters. But some of these characters get a decent amount of screen time and backstories that I was rather surprised to see in a game like this. They all have their own unique personalities and varied interesting designs, and some will also offer side quests. But for the most part, they're really just here to give us more to see and do as we explore. And speaking of exploring, let's check out that sick gameplay. Though our goal is to reclaim the surface, most of our time will actually be spent underground in various caves, subway stations, factories, and similar such locations. The map designs here are laid out like a Metroidvania, however, I find they rarely function as one. What I mean by this is that in most Metroidvanias, the main means of progression is to find new abilities with which you backtrack to older locations to make use of and unlock new paths. With Dead or School, this is rarely the case. Rather, the means of progression feels more like an old Doom or Duke Nukem 3D game, where some places may be locked off, but they only require you to flip a switch in another room or locate a hidden keycard. Hisako herself doesn't really have much in the way of abilities, and what she does have is mainly meant for combat and platforming. Early on, we do get 2 NPCs who can unlock new paths for us, but that's about where the new methods of progression end. Most rooms are just arenas for you to face off against hordes of monsters, though there are special challenge rooms and obstacles here and there. Certain challenges, for instance, will test your athletic reflexes or have you racing against the clock. While these can add a nice change of pace every now and then, some of them are also the game's biggest source of frustration. But it's not like they'd exactly have to be. Thing is, the area this game suffers in the absolute worst is the consistency of its mechanics and performance. It often feels when the game is trying to do something that it doesn't normally do, like auto-scroll you through a gauntlet of obstacles, things start to break down. Sometimes the grapples will no longer work as they should, double jump stop triggering, the frame frame rate gets a little hurt, and a whole myriad of other issues. And it's not like the exploration functions perfectly even when the game isn't trying to do something special, but the issues there don't end up being such a source of frustration. Sometimes grapple points that are supposed to be highlighted in blue just won't be. I want to say about 7 times on this 20 to 25 hour journey, the game hard crashed on me, 4 of which were in the final dungeon. At random points, you might get stuck on nothing while walking around, in which case you can just jump and get out of it. It really can be a mess when it comes to performance and the technical aspects, but the game really hits its stride in the combat. With the left stick, you move your character, and with the right stick, you aim. You have a run, a jump, a dodge, which will slow down time if perfectly executed, a fire, and a special attack button, all of which drain your stamina meter. When your stamina meter is empty, you can still move around, you just can't perform any of those specific tasks until it's at least charged up a little bit. Stamina thankfully recharges very quickly, but with the high speed pace of some of these battles, you can never have enough. To help with this, you can enter a crouching position by pushing down on the D-pad, which will quickly charge your stamina but temporarily render you immobile. You bring 3 weapons into battle, and each one has a set number of times you can use it before having to rest at a save point. You have your melee weapons, which can be swords, hammers, axes, and more, your basic firearms, which can range from shotguns, SMGs, assault rifles, sniper rifles, and more, and finally your special firearms, which include rocket launchers, flamethrowers, and other such high-powered artillery. Only your melee weapon can be used infinitely, but once you pass its standard limit, it will drop to about half its standard damage. Your other weapons are completely out of commission as soon as the ammo is drained. Each weapon has its own set of stats that determines its damage output, its rate of attack, the spread of the shot, the stamina drain, the weight, and more. These weapons can be reinforced a set number of times to up their base stats at the cost of yellow gears and cash. Further, special abilities can be added to them using the pink gears. What special ability you get is up to RNG, but it's a cheap and easy process, so you can keep re-rolling it until you get the ability you want, or in the unlikely scenario, run out of gears. On top of this, there are 2 slots on each weapon where you can further alter their stats by equipping items that can raise their power, speed, ammunition load, reload speed, durability, and much more. These items, though not always, will typically come with special abilities as well, such as causing an AoE explosion around you when you take clothing damage. Yes, there is clothing damage, this is an ecchi game. Increased item drops, increased chance of rare enemy spawns, these are kind of like loot goblins from Diablo 3, or even having a drone follow you around to fire on enemies with a set number of shots at a set amount of damage. Equipping these, however, adds to your overall weight, and if you go over your weight limit, the game will force you to respec until you're within it. This is kind of a soft attempt at preventing you from becoming overpowered, though I found I was often able to equip the best of everything I had without hitting the limit anyway. This may be because I was often over-leveled, or they simply weren't expecting me to collect every hidden refugee on my first playthrough. When you level up or rescue a refugee, your total weight capacity, HP, and other stats increase. You're also rewarded skill points, which you can choose to invest in 3 categories related to your weapon types. Despite being strong enough for the weight limit to never really pose an issue, I also can't say I felt overpowered aside from a very brief moment at the very start. When I first started doing combat, I was blown away by all the options at my fingertips. The drone especially impressed me. If I already had these abilities at the very start, then surely the endgame gear was going to be insane. Right? Well, no, not really. By and large, everything is made available to you at the very beginning of the game. You just find more versions of the same things with higher stats as you go along. So if you're looking for combat to evolve throughout the game, it really only evolves insofar as the game introducing new enemy types and you changing up your weapon arsenal. That all said, the battles stayed fun for the duration of its runtime, but there were occasional frustrations. Though I love the chaos of it all and the Left 4 Dead style unique enemies, it can often become very easy to lose sight of yourself. In that, I mean all of the enemies are highlighted in red and you're not highlighted at all. It doesn't help either that the camera is frequently rather zoomed out, which makes exploration tough at times and battles nearly unmanageable, especially if you're playing undocked. And on that note, I absolutely do not recommend this game in handheld. It is big screen or bust. That said, these issues are not usually enough to get you killed unfairly, just maybe unfairly injured, in which said injury may play play into a death later, which maybe we can say was partially unfair then. Still though, the level of difficulty is something I actually really liked in this game, and that maybe partially came from the jank of it all. Oftentimes it felt as if my ammo and health was being stretched to the limit, especially when neither can be restored between checkpoints. It often felt that there was just one more encounter than I could possibly handle. I would die before the next checkpoint, try again with the same loadout, but I always felt encouraged to try harder and play smarter. Focusing more on what weapons I was using at what times and conserving as much as possible to minimize resources and maximize my effect, I would find every time that I absolutely had what it takes to get by, but just barely. This is what kept me going more than anything. That and the desire to see what the next boss was going to be. Though bosses are really hit or miss, and their levels of difficulty are all over the place. Some are all well and good, balanced, and function mostly fine. But the problems from one boss to the next couldn't be much more different. The human cocoon, for instance, functions fine, but it is an absolutely obnoxious test of your patience. It's up to chance whether or not you'll even be able to take him down before you drain all of your ammo. His HP pool is incredibly large, the moments you can actually damage him are minimal, and the arena simply doesn't help. The mechanical spider, while one of the easier bosses, has a certain quirk that is really not easy to adjust to. To damage him, you first need to get onto his back by swinging from pole to pole. However, on the last grapple point, the camera orientation changes, and if you don't immediately let go of the direction you were pressing, you simply fall off the rail and have to start all over. But all in all, I do like the variety of challenges the bosses provide. Each boss is distinct from the others and utilizes a unique gimmick to overcome them. Though the quirks in the bosses, and I guess in the game in general, could be frustrating from time to time, sometimes extremely frustrating, most of the time, I actually kind of like the jank. But then, I am somebody who tends to feel a bit of jank is usually a good thing. Maybe it's not an intentional part of the game design, but it can be fun to learn the weird character of games like this and adapt to them. It's an experience you don't get in the average game, and it adds a new level of interaction and challenge to games like this, and it certainly gives them a unique character. Though there are times where the jank goes too far, and there's definitely things that the game needs to get fixed. As much as I might excuse some of Dead or School's odd quirks, the frame dips that I experienced late game and the hard crashes absolutely should not exist. The crashes seem to happen the most during cutscenes, when the game is trying to load in a new music track, but it has happened in combat as well. The frame dips can happen just about anywhere, but there's a couple places and instances they seem more common. Large rooms with filters, lighting effects, or large moving objects tend to run a little slower than the rest, but battles seemingly at random can get really rough too. Having done the same battles with the same loadout a few times and seen it run like garbage once and then clean the next, I can't say for certain what the cause of poor performance here is, but I did notice an uptick in poor performance in the late game after I started using the drone ability more. Similarly, every other technical aspect in this game is a mixed bag. Voiceovers, Japanese only, get the job done but don't stand out, except for in the last cutscene where they were so buried in the music I couldn't even hear them. The soundtrack almost has some good tunes. There's some cool heavy metal tracks in this game, but they are short and they do not loop properly, so they're always a little bit jarring. The sound effects are budget, but that kind of fits with the charm and the aesthetic of the whole game. The 2D art is decent enough and offers a lot of fun, interesting character designs, but the in-game animation and the pre-rendered cutscenes the game uses are often pretty poor looking. When dealing with the pre-rendered cutscenes, the resolution and bitrate is very low, and the creatures featured within them are textured worse than their in-game models seem to be, and the in-game models already aren't textured that well. When it comes to the translation, it definitely hurts in some places. Right from the offset, you can see small words just missing from sentences. These words aren't hard to fill in for yourself, and you can easily read around them, but things do get a little bit worse. This might seem a little nebulous as there's no way to perfectly describe it, but the wording in the game simply doesn't feel natural. It's frequently difficult to read and understand with the speed I would normally read something at, as the general phrasing is just that little bit off. It almost always makes sense, it just takes a weird way of getting there. But at the end of this all, the question remains, would I recommend this game? And it's simply like, no, definitely not to everybody. Playing it feels like playing a friend's first game. A game that they'd maybe been developing in secret for a long time. A game that, well, way better than you would have expected out of them, has the fun factor of a 7.5 out of 10 and the technical issues of a 4. Jank to the core as it was though, I couldn't stop playing it. It was genuinely enjoyable. The gameplay loop is just addictive enough that I was willing to put up with its immeasurable amounts of rough edges. This was made by a very small amount of people who didn't exactly have much experience or know-how, and yeah, that shows. So many times throughout the game, I found myself wondering about certain design choices. Like every time there's a camera pan to show you something in the stage, they use a pre-rendered FMV rather than the in-game engine. Was this a creative choice, or was it a workaround that they used because they maybe didn't know how to handle this kind of camera pan another way? It's a fascinating experience for so many reasons, and I really look forward to seeing how this studio, Nanafushi, develops in the future and how growing incompetency may help or hurt whatever they make next. What I do know is, I had fun, and the game's fucking borked.